For some background, I'm a 25-year-old female living in a nice neighborhood in the suburban Midwest. One of my biggest fears is someone breaking into my home. I'm an extremely light sleeper, so the slightest noise, light, or anything otherwise disturbing the darkness and silence as I sleep will wake me up. My parents live in a neighborhood that's very nice and very wealthy. It's heavily wooded, with houses quite close to one another until you reach the end of it, where our house was located. The houses are a bit further apart, and until recently, it was far less built up than the area near the entrance. Our yard isn't too large, and there aren't mature trees, but there is a large field that breaks up our neighborhood and the one behind it. We have a ranch-style house, and my bedroom has two large windows that give me a view into the front yard. From my bed, I can see the yard lamp that provides a rather small pool of light. Just beyond that is the road. The other window looked into part of my backyard. As a preface of sorts, when I was in high school, my boyfriend used to sneak over to stay the night quite a few times. This is a rather disgusting detail, but he would open up my bedroom window that looked out into the backyard in order to take a piss. I didn't have screens. One night, at about 12 a.m., mid-piss, he sort of freaked out, saying he saw someone walking around the backyard. He quickly adjusted himself, closed the window, and I took a look out back. I could vaguely see the outline of someone surveying the property, almost near the deck. I panicked and immediately ran out to go wake up my dad. He jumps out of bed, storms out to the deck, turns the outside lights on, and looks around. He can't see anything, so he decides to go have a walk around the deck. Again, nothing. He goes back to bed, and I'm terrified. Two more bizarre instances occurred, and the second one also involving my boyfriend during high school. His mother was compliant with him staying over for a bit, because she understood my dad was strict, so she'd agree to come pick him up in the evening when my dad wouldn't allow him there. She would park quite a bit up the street and wait for him to jump out my window and walk over. This evening, at about 11 p.m., well after my dad went to sleep, my boyfriend left, and I watched as he slowly made his way through the dark yard. I could see his mother's car in the distance. Abruptly, I saw his figure gain speed, swiftly walking until he broke out in a sprint towards the headlights. I was confused, but assumed that he was eager to get to her car. As soon as her car took off, however, he called me on his mother's cell phone, saying that someone was watching him and had started to chase him. I was afraid and sort of doubted his story, but I decided I didn't want to bother my dad yet again. I tried to just sleep it off. Fast forward to 3 years later when I'm 19. I was back home for the summer from college. I was enrolled in a summer language program, and I had gotten back from work at 10 p.m. I needed to do homework and was up quite late working. Near 1 a.m., I noticed that something wasn't right with the yard lamp out front. My curtains are quite thin, so a change in the light was noticeable. I pulled them open and saw what appeared to be a person standing in front of it, to where they were blocking the glow. Then, a red cloth was thrown over the light. I was terrified, not knowing what the hell was going on, so I threw my books, ran to my dad's room, and woke him up. He looks out the front windows near the door, sees the red cloth, and mutters a "what the fuck" before walking out front. He takes it off, looks around, and comes back inside. It was a red towel. He says it was probably some dumb kids, puts the towel in the laundry room, and went back to bed. I was still anxious and creeped out, thinking that it was some kind of marker or a symbol for something. I'll add that after washing the towel, it's in the linen closet in the bathroom, in regular use in my household. I wanted to include the above instances to give you an idea about how I developed my anxiety and general uneasiness about prowlers, potential intruders, and creepers. This instance occurred over the summer, when I was again staying at my parents' house for a few months before moving to another city. As I said, I'm a very light sleeper, and the curtains that my mother put up in my bedroom are nearly sheer. It was about 3 a.m. and I was fast asleep. The sound of a vehicle stirred me awake, and I saw the glare of headlights out front through the curtains. I immediately sat up and opened them. It was a truck that was sitting out front of the driveway and then started to drive on slowly. I assumed it was the paper deliverer and was about to collapse back into bed when I saw them abruptly hit the brakes a few feet away from our driveway. From their headlights, I clearly saw a figure of a man walking in front of them. The truck stayed put for about 5 seconds after the man passed in front of them, and then sped off. I watched, frozen and scared, wondering what the hell I was seeing. From the shadow light of the lamp out front, I could make out the person walking in our yard, and from my perspective, approaching quite quickly, and with a purpose. I shot out of bed and went to the guest room that was right next to mine. I looked out of the window because it afforded a better, more complete view of the front yard. There was a man standing right at the edge of the circle of light the lamp gave up. Terrified, I woke my parents up, practically screaming and shaking. My dad, now a wary veteran of these wake-up calls, dutifully strolls out of the bedroom, turns on the outside lights, and goes outside. At the same time, I ran back to the guest room to watch the figure. As soon as that happened, I saw him retreat into the darkness, and I couldn't see him any longer. My dad says he's gone, and groggily goes back to bed. My mother is less convinced, and stays up and sits in the family room. After conversing with her briefly about how I'm never sleeping again, I go back to the guest room. Of course, the man has reappeared. From what I could make out from the light given off by the lamp, he was facing our house. I march out of the room, declaring, "He's back. Fuck this shit, I'm calling 911. I grab the phone, dial, and talk to the dispatcher. Meanwhile, the man steps a bit further forward, just enough so that I could see something glint in the light. Something metal. Something long. It looked like a knife. I'm explaining this the best I can to the dispatcher. They say they'll send a policeman out to survey, and asked if I want to give a statement or if I just want them to patrol the area. I said that since I can't see the face or give any useful information at this point, that I didn't want to give a statement or talk to the officer. Just then, the man stepped back and I couldn't make out his image any longer. I stood there watching and told the dispatcher that he had disappeared. Due to the well-lit yard of our neighbors across the street, however, I was able to see that he had made his way to their driveway and was crouching up to it. He then disappeared from my sight in the massive shrubs that surrounded the front of the house. I informed the dispatcher of this and we ended the call. Within minutes, a police cruiser approached. Unfortunately, all they did was drive up and down once. No spotlight, nothing. They stopped at the end of our street for a moment and then sped off. A few minutes after the police had left, the neighbors across the street turned on all of their house lights. The front of the house is very open with a lot of windows. I had assumed they had heard a noise or noticed something was amiss. At this point, it was about 4 a.m. My mother and I were both unable to sleep. We kept a lookout on our neighbors' houses. In a few hours, when it was daybreak and an acceptable enough hour, we told our neighbors what we saw to warn them. The people across the street admitted to having been awakened by some noise out front and were feeling uneasy. They ended up removing the heavy shrubs from their yard a week later. The next night, both of my parents loaded their gun of choice and kept it near the side of the bed. I took a Xanax and a big glass of wine, and then I moved away anyway. I'll be back home next week, and after reading some of these stories here, some way creepier and far more dangerous, of course, I started to feel a bit nostalgic and unnerved. I don't know what the hell to make of all these experiences. I'll never not be terrified of the prospect of a home invasion or any sort of lurker. I'm far more conscious of this than my parents. I make sure all windows and doors are locked no matter what. And these experiences have only proved to me how important it is to do this, no matter how secure you feel in your community. My mother is a primary school teacher in a rural town in Australia. About 10 years ago, she was offered the principal position at a tiny mountain school an hour from where we lived. The mountain town was kind of a long-running joke for us townies. Just mentioning it would cause any local to start humming the dueling banjos theme from Deliverance. The population was under 40 people. Most of them had the same last name, and were pretty well known for keeping it in the family. However, being promoted from teacher to principal was a big deal for my mom, so we decided that we'd all live at the old schoolhouse during the week and come back to civilization on the weekends. When we arrived, I was shocked at just how small the town was. One street surrounded by thick scrub and bushland. Dilapidated houses tucked away out of sight from the main road. No streetlights. No shops. And the school was tiny, only about 14 kids in total, and all related to each other in some way. Some of the students had that Innsmouth look that only comes with generations of kissing cousins, but overall they were generally nice and well-behaved little kids, and my mom enjoyed her new job. I had just finished high school, and was waiting for university to start, so I spent most of my days alone in the schoolhouse, reading or cooking while my siblings were at school and my parents were at work. However, as the weeks progressed, I found myself spending more and more time at the school helping my mom, because I couldn't stand being alone there. With no TV reception and only an old Walkman and some shitty cassette tapes to fill the silence, I found myself fluctuating between bored or paranoid most of the time. And there was always a lot of sudden and random old house noise that didn't sound like it was the house at all. Scratching and shuffling sounds at odd intervals that frequently sounded like footsteps or voices. I tried to pass it off as paranoia for as long as I could, but shit finally hit the fan one day. I stopped my tape mid-song and distinctly heard a man's voice quietly whispering random numbers from the front veranda. 40, 40, 9, 40, 17. I'm not afraid of any ghosts, but I am afraid of hillbilly home invasions, so I took off to the school and reported it to my mother, who of course didn't believe me. Then to my father, who also didn't believe me. My sister did though. She said she hadn't slept well since she was awoken nights before by the sound of a tree branch scraping on her bedroom window, when there was no tree. She said she thought she had seen a man standing in the backyard late one night too, but when she mustered the courage to look again, he was gone. Pretty soon we were the first teenage sisters to ever insist that they should start sharing a room. My parents thought we were being ridiculous. However, one evening after dinner, we were visited by two of the local men, who told them something that changed their mind. After asking if we'd had any trouble at the house, they proceeded to tell us that everyone else in town had been experiencing trouble now for over a month. Apparently, men dressed in makeshift camouflage gear had been seen wandering around the main street at night. It had come to the town's attention because, while the town was used to strangers in hunting gear, these guys were covered in leaves and grass and sticks. Nobody knew who they were. They weren't locals, and there were at least 10 different guys, always traveling alone and always in the same weird clothing. At first, the locals were having a laugh about it, It certainly wasn't common to see people dressed as walking bushes outside of a Warner Bros. Cartoon, even in hunting season. It was all very absurd and funny. At least, until these guys started coming on to private property. One lady woke up to hear something moving under her house, shining a flashlight up to the floorboards. Another man came home to find a camouflaged man crouched on his roof. One man had heard muttering from his back porch, only to go out and discover that someone had unchained his hunting dogs from their run and tied them to his back doorknob and drawn a large X in red chalk on the door. Pretty much every local had been terrorized by one of these guys in the night, and some of them in the day. The local guys warned my dad to keep things locked up and be vigilant. Over the course of the next month, similar events occurred. My mother even saw one of the men on the edge of the school grounds during the day and called the police. The sightings were frequent, as were the chalk X's. One of the locals even saw a man in the strange camouflage gear standing on his front lawn, whimpering like an animal in the early hours of the morning. The local guy threatened him while his wife called the police, but the man silently stood his ground, smiling at them in the dark. The local man eventually lost his cool and beat the heck out of this creeper, who stood there smiling through the entire beating, then calmly walked back into the bush, still smiling and bleeding, before the police arrived. Unfortunately, there isn't a cool ending to this story. The school closed not long after due to government funding cuts, and my mother got a new job closer to home, which meant we left pretty swiftly. We moved back home after spending only 5 months up in the mountain country, and no one was too sorry about that. I often wonder who these guys were out in the middle of nowhere, and what they were doing. I often wonder, though, who those guys were out in the middle of nowhere, and why they were terrorizing the town. When I was growing up, my older brother raced flat-track motorcycles, and as a result, my dad and him were gone most weekends during the racing season. Sometimes my mom, my younger sister, and myself would tag along, but my mom was never really into it, so she would keep my sister and me home most of the time and plan fun things for us girls to do during the weekend. This incident happened on one of the weekends where we stayed home, back in 1987, so I was 10 and my sister was 8. It started out like any other Saturday with my dad and brother gone. My mom took us out to eat McDonald's. We went to the mall, and then we came home to play Monopoly and watch cable. At around 10 p.m., my sister and I started to get sleepy, so my mom brought out the sleeping bags for all 3 of us to sleep in the living room together. I had to ask my mom years later what time this was, because as a kid, I didn't pay attention to the clock so much. So around 2 a.m., someone starts banging on our front door. Our front door was pretty strange. It had 4 large panes of glass that weren't opaque, so they were covered with small curtains. We all wake up to this pounding and rush to the door and look out one of the windows. There's this girl at the door. She was probably in her late teens or early 20s, and I remember her wearing a white and blue windbreaker. She's frantic and crying, and begging my mom to let her in, because she said her boyfriend is chasing her, and she's afraid he's going to kill her. My mom remained calm as hell in this scary situation, and said, "I'm sorry, love. I can't let you in because I've got 2 young children with me, and I can't risk your boyfriend harming them if he gets in. I can call the police for you if you just stay here." Of course, that didn't sit well with the girl, as she started crying more and pointed to her foot that was broken and in a cast. "Please, ma'am, you have to let me in. He's coming for me." Again, my mom politely refused and turned and ran into the kitchen and dialed 911. Our phone was mounted onto the wall in the kitchen with a ridiculously long cord, so she was able to get back to the door while on the phone with the dispatch and told her the police were on the way. This made the girl go even more crazy and say, "I don't need the police because I'll be dead before they get here." My mom apologized again and said she was sorry, but she wasn't going to open the door. At this point, the girl just turned around and walked off into the darkness. About 5 or 7 minutes later, the police showed up. My mom gave a statement, and as she's doing so, my dad and brother come home from the race. My dad didn't even turn off the truck. He just ran up, looking terrified, asking what was going on. While my mom is telling my dad what happened, another officer walked up and said he didn't see anyone, but found a shoe in the street in front of our house. The police leave and we all sit in the living room for a bit to decompress, and I remember thinking that maybe my mom wasn't being very nice to the girl and should have just let her in. Fast forward to 2001, and it's about a week after I gave birth to my first son. Family and friends are at my house and doting on my baby. After most people leave, there's just my parents, my sister, me, and my son, sitting in my living room this time. And I made a comment about how I didn't really love the neighborhood we'd moved to, but I was proud of actually having my own home with my husband. And then my sister says, "Hey Mom, remember that lady that came to our door demanding to come in?" My mom says, "Yes, very well." At this point, I can tell my mom and dad weren't comfortable talking about it, because they gave each other nervous glances. So my sister, being the asshole that she can be, says, "Why didn't you just let her in? I wonder if her boyfriend did end up killing her." My dad interjects and says that my mom did the right thing, because it was late and we were home alone. He then adds this little end to it. Plus, they ended up finding her in a car with a boyfriend, smoking dope a few blocks over. They had a rope, duct tape, 2 shovels, and a shit ton of knives in the truck. My sister and I in unison gasped. I asked why we were never told about that, and my dad said they decided not to tell us so that we wouldn't feel unsafe in our own home. Finding this out made me feel like a huge jerk, because I had always thought my mom was being somewhat rude, and I wondered what happened to the girl. Now though, I know my mom most likely prevented a home invasion with her tough but right decision to deny this girl entry to our home. Learning about that sent chills down my spine. Even writing it out now gives me goosebumps. What's up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I wanted to thank you guys so much for watching the video, especially if you made it this far to the end. I also wanted to say hello to all of you new subscribers who I've gained recently. It's pretty amazing. I just hit 15,000 the other day, and now I'm already at like 16,200 a day later, which is pretty insane. So, welcome to all of you new guys, and I'm glad to have you here. If you guys liked the video, please feel free to leave a comment below, and leave a like and share if you feel so inclined. If you have any stories that you'd like me to read, or any personal stories that you'd like to send in, there will be links to my social media in the description below. That is my Gmail, Facebook, and Twitter. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to include your story in a video as soon as possible. If you do decide to send a story in, please feel free to include in the tagline what the story is about, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. For those of you who are curious about the music used in this video, in the description of all my videos, the music is listed near the bottom in the order of which it appears, and I also usually provide links to the tracks, so if you guys are curious about the music, go ahead and check that out down there. If you have any constructive criticism, please feel free to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.